Hey YouTube, this is Trains and Destinations, and this video here is the first video that I am recording in the year 2021. So Happy New Year, Happy 2021 everybody. Finally, we are over with the horrific year that was 2020. Chaos, disease, you name it, pretty much anything and everything bad that could have happened did happen in 2020. But now we're in 2021. I think things will get better this year. And to start off with my first video of 2021, at least the first video that I am filming this year, we're going to take a look at the Motorola Moto G7 Play. So G7 Play came out in 2019, so at this point the phone is almost 2 years old. But this phone is still quite popular in the phone market. In fact, Motorola still sells this phone brand new on their website for anywhere from $130 to $200, depending if it's on sale or not. And a fun fact is that the 2020 Moto E actually has the same exact specs as this phone does, and we'll get into the specs later in the video. So again, this phone came out in 2019. It launched alongside the Moto G7 Power, as well as the standard Moto G7. Obviously, this being the Play version, it was the cheapest of the three. I believe this launched at $200. Yes, this did launch at $200, putting it slightly above the Moto E, but lower than the G7 Power and the G7. Now, looking at the box here, this phone does have a retail-specific box, so you can even see the hook there at the top. If you bought this phone directly from Motorola, it would come in a standard phone box, but this particular one is in retail-friendly packaging. If you go over the back of the box, it tells you some of the features. So this does have, it says here, Qualcomm Snapdragon 632, 5.7-inch, let me turn on the light here. There we go. 5.7-inch max vision display, 19:9 aspect ratio, 13 megapixel plus 8 megapixel cameras, as well as a fingerprint reader, and again, your Snapdragon 632. It tells you what's included in the box, and you can clearly see it says unlocked, and it works on all major US carriers. Okay, so we'll put the phone box back down. Take a little bit of a better look at the box. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. So the flap here is already open, and here we are greeted with the phone. Now, I should note that this phone was actually my daily driver phone for a year and a half. So I got this phone in 2019, a few months after it launched, and I actually had this phone from spring 2019 up until now. So I actually had this phone for at least a year and a half. And I used this phone alongside, at the time, my Moto G6. And when it comes to the G7 Play, there were definitely things that I liked about this phone, but there were things I absolutely hated about this phone. So, but before we get into that, let's go ahead and lift off the cover here, which has the phone. Now, at the bottom here, there would normally be a charger, but I do not have the charger anymore for this phone. So, but yeah, this would have come with a 10-watt charger, and your charging cable would have been here. But yeah, this phone did come with a 10-watt rapid charger. If you got the standard G7 or the G7 Power, that would have came, I believe, with a 15-watt charger. At least the G7 had a 15-watt charger. I believe the G7 Power had the same, came with the same 10-watt charger as this phone. And then as you can see, the booklets kind of flew out of here. Turn the light back on so you can get a better look. So yeah, if you open this up, you can see inside your SIM tool, I believe, would have been in there. And then here are your booklets. So you got your README guide as well as your, safety and legal information. So let's go ahead and we'll pop the phone out. And here it is. So there you go. This is the Moto G7 Play. It does have a screen protector on it. I have a case and screen protector on all of my phones. Now, as you can see, for being a phone that I've used for almost 2 years, it's in pretty good shape. There's only a few smudges. It's hard to see, but there is some scratches on the camera lens, but it doesn't impact the photos or the photo quality. So this is a full plastic phone, but it does feel quite solid. I forget what the color of this phone is. It is called Deep Indigo. So yeah, it's Deep Indigo, and you can see that it is basically sort of a deep blue, almost a black here. And you can see it's actually pretty nice looking. I mean, this is a cheap phone, but it does look pretty nice. So obviously you got your camera and flash. This is a 13 megapixel camera with electronic image stabilization, your flash, and your Motorola logo, which also is the fingerprint sensor. Then at the bottom of the phone, you have your USB-C port, which you would connect your 10-watt charger to, and microphone. And then here on the left side of the phone is where your SIM card tray is located. And then on the right side of the phone, you do have a textured power button as well as your volume rockers. And I will say, these buttons are quite clicky. You know, way better than you would expect for a, budget phone like this. Now, continuing on, if we're going to look at the screen here, this phone does have a 5.7-inch, what Motorola calls a Max Vision HD display. So it is only 720p, and you can also see that it does have a very huge notch. Fun fact, the first screen protector I used on this phone was actually that was meant for an iPhone X, because both phones have a similar notch, although this one is even a little bit bigger than the iPhone X. And so yeah, is it distracting? And the answer is yes, this was quite a distraction for me. Now, did I get used to the notch? The answer is yes. I definitely did get used to the notch. However, it is quite prominent, and I would say that the biggest issue regarding the notch is that when you got a notification, a lot of notifications were hidden by the notch. So really, I would only be able to see maybe 1-2 notifications right here, and then because of the notch, the rest of the notifications would just be hidden. Motorola really didn't include any special software tricks to where you could see the notifications. No, whatever the notch blocked, you couldn't see it. And this also meant that there was essentially no battery indicator on this phone. If you turned on the battery indicator, you would just see a number inside of the battery light, inside the battery symbol. And as you can see, that is a very, very tiny symbol. So, yeah, not too good. But again, is this something you get used to? Yes, but just to note, this phone does have that big, big notch there, which is something that the G7 doesn't have. I mean, it does have a notch, but it's very small. And then the G Power, even the G7 Power, has a smaller notch. And so that is just something to take note. But again, it's something that you can get used to. Now, in terms of the battery of the phone, it does have a 3,000 mAh battery. And in my time of owning the phone, the battery life on this phone has been really good. Sometimes I would get up to 8 hours of screen on time. So it is a really, really good battery if you do basic tasks. So the battery life is quite good. Now going back to the screen, it is a 720p 5.7-inch 19:9 display, and it is good for what it is. So the colors are pretty decent, and despite it being 720p, it has a decent pixel density, and you can't really see pixels. So zooming in, it doesn't look the best, so I'll just bring the phone up here, and you can see it really doesn't look bad at all. So unless you have the phone really close, you can see even close up, it doesn't look bad at all. So, watching content on this is perfectly fine. Because of the fact that it is a smaller screen, it really isn't an issue, the fact that the phone is only 720p. So yeah, not bad at all. The only issue is the notch, but again, you can get used to that. So continuing on, we're going to go over the specs. Now for me, the reason why I don't own this phone anymore, in fact I'm selling it, is because of the specs. Now in terms of the processor, this phone does have the Snapdragon 632, which is an octa-core chip, and it is a quite good budget processor. It's power efficient, and it has enough power for basic tasks, texting, web browsing, watching videos. It does that perfectly well. And again, the performance is decent, and the battery health, the power efficiency is really good. On the other hand, though, this phone only has 32 gigabytes of internal storage, which when I got the phone a year ago, that was fine, but now I am playing big games like Call of Duty Mobile, in which that's a game that takes up at least 5 gigabytes of space. And so because of that and other big games and the fact that videos take up a lot of space, a 32 gig phone in 2020, now 2021, a 32 gig phone just isn't that good anymore. You really cannot, you can do 32 gigs, but realistically a 64 gig phone is really the minimum you need in order to have a good phone experience. And so the 32 gigs of storage became a problem, at least for me. With just a year's worth of pictures and a few videos and just a few games, I used up probably 27 out of the 32 gigs of storage. And so part of the reason I am getting rid of the phone in which I did already, is because it simply did not have enough internal storage for me. The other problem with the phone, this is probably the biggest issue, is the RAM. This phone only has 2 gigabytes of RAM, which for Android in 2021 is just not enough. It is not enough. This is a phone to where you could hold open maybe at most 4 or 5 apps at a time if they're basic social media apps. But as soon as you open the camera basically takes up all of the RAM. And so if you open the camera, take a picture, close the camera, and then go back to one of those apps you have open, it will reload. You know, in my experience, especially after the phone did update to Android 10, it originally came with Android 9, it had an update to Android 10, it will not get updated to Android 11. So I would say that on Android 10, the phone is still fast, but I feel like the RAM management is worse. Again, you can have at best maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 apps open, any more, and then your older apps are going to close on you. And this became really annoying. Now, with the 632 processor, it didn't make it too terrible. Apps at least reopened pretty quickly, but because of the lack of RAM, it was just annoying. It made multitasking on this phone extremely, extremely difficult. You know, so while 2 gigs of RAM on an iPhone is fine, 2 gigs of RAM on Android is simply terrible. And it's sad too because that basically crippled this phone. You know, the standard Moto G7, that has 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of storage, which is a perfectly usable combo there. And even the Power had at least 3 gigs of RAM. But this only having 2 gigs of RAM just made this phone to where it's usable, but only for basic use. And just getting to the conclusion of this video, is the G7 Play worth it in 2021? And the answer is, it depends. It depends. So if you're someone who needs a phone for just calling and texting, you'll be good. The phone has a really good vibration motor, surprisingly. So if you're someone who likes to have vibration on while you're texting, you know, you like that tactile feedback, the vibration motor in this phone is excellent. Call quality is also quite good, and your speaker here also doubles as the speaker for the whole phone. So the earpiece speaker is also the speaker for the whole phone. So at least, you know, the sound will be coming at you. So watching videos on this phone, despite the big notch, is nice too. And so if you need a phone for basic things like that, calling, texting, and watching videos or social media, this phone will be fine. But if you need a phone for gaming, forget about it. This phone will not game well. I have played Call of Duty on this phone, and you have to have the graphics on low, and you have to move the frame rate to medium. So yeah, you can play games on this hypothetically, but you're going to have to play on low settings, and you're going to have to curtail the frame rate if you don't want your phone to be stuttering as you're playing the game. So if you want to be able to game, don't get this phone. And also, don't get this phone if you're expecting a good camera. The 13 megapixel camera in this phone is decent. In good lighting, you can take good pictures, but when you're in poor lighting conditions or you're in a complex lighting situation, don't expect the camera to do a good job. I mean, it is a 13 megapixel sensor, but again, the camera here is really nothing special. So especially at nighttime or in a complex lighting situation, the images I found were quite noisy and just out of focus. A lot of times I'd have to manually set the autofocus because just opening up the camera app, the image would be out of focus. So yeah, don't get this phone because of the camera. And don't get this phone if you're expecting to game. But if you do need a phone just for very basic use, and especially if you like a smaller phone like this, then, you know, I can recommend this phone. Not to mention that the G7 Play is quite cheap. So, for example, routinely you can find this phone, especially on eBay and other sites like that, brand new, for around $100. And for $100, this is a good deal. Used, you can get the phone anywhere from $60 to $80 unlocked, and I'd say it is a good deal, but again, it all goes down to your use case. If you need a phone for basic use, the G7 Play will work, but if you need it for anything more complex than that, if you know you're not okay with only having 2 gigs of RAM, which makes multitasking impossible, then you know you're better off looking elsewhere. And not to mention that the 2020 Moto E, now that phone's $150, and it does have the same specs as this phone, but of course that'll have Android 11, as well as a bigger screen, so that's something to consider too. But overall, you know, the G7 Play is a decent phone, And, you know, for the time in which I had the phone, it definitely did what I needed it to do. So, anyway, thank you for watching my overview and quick review of the Moto G7 Play.